Welcome to another episode of Prepper Talk Radio, radio for the ready-minded, the podcast for the prepared, with your hosts, Scott, Shane, and Paris. We are in the house tonight. We have an exciting episode for you today. We're going to talk about the looming threats in our near and maybe midterm future. But before we do that, we want to make sure to remind you to go check out our website at preppertalkradio.com. Across the top, you'll see resources and a few other things like a challenge, and then you'll see the store. Take advantage of those resources. Some of them are free. Some of them are links to affiliates that will help support the show and get you guys the right gear, the gear that we support, the gear we've looked at. We brought a lot of the people in our affiliate links onto the show. We've interviewed them. We believe in the products and services that we're promoting on our affiliate links. Also, check out our Facebook group at Emergency Prep and Self-Reliance, because we'd love to continue the conversation with you offline and hear your thoughts and feelings about different topics that you'd like to have us talk about on the show. Without much more, then let's get started. How you guys feeling today?
Pretty good.
Cyber insecure.
Well, as of the record, when this episode drops, it'll be the day after Donald Trump gets inaugurated. So hopefully that actually, I'm predicting the future. It's going to happen. To happen. But that's one of the potential looming threats.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's so much we could talk about, and I'm going to let Shane kind of kick it off. But I'm positive for the year. I'm positive there's a lot of good things going on, but there's things that we need to be aware of, things we need to just kind of keep an eye on. And for me, the things to be concerned with are the things where math doesn't make sense. If things don't add up, something's wrong or something's off. So I keep an eye on that. I don't just rabbit hole it and chase it all the time, but I keep it on the awareness loop. And that's what we're going to really dig into today, is things on the awareness loop you should be aware of, things that have caught our eyes, but also things that have caught our attention to help us kind of say, okay, what's really going on? Let's read between the lines.
We know part of the agenda, I'm using air quotes, right? Because it's so such a theoretical thing, this agenda. What is this agenda, right? What I do and what I recommend and what I've seen is what's standing out in the news. What is being pushed on us? What are they trying to show us? What are they trying to tell us? What are they trying to announce? Right. So obviously the drones were a huge issue, and where'd they go? They're not in the news anymore, or rarely. But what I see a lot now is threat of China cyber attack. That kind of comes and goes. It's back in the media again now. So that one of the things that brought my mind to thinking about, okay, we need to have our eyes and our ears and our minds open to the potential, because obviously we've had a heck of a start to 2025. One heck of a start, man. And that the way it goes in the financial markets in January is kind of the way it goes the rest of the year. Paris, I forget that financial saying, but the first 2 weeks are like the first month, and the way the first month goes, the rest of the year goes, something like that. Mm-hmm. And I think it's gotten off to a heck of a start in the markets. It's been pretty tame so far the past couple of weeks, but lately I've been seeing a lot of info being thrown our way about, China's going to do this, and they're attacking us here and there. And, is that blame? Are they trying to eventually throw blame when something happens? Are they setting us up to think a certain way? Because that's obviously what most of the mainstream media does. It's trying to program us a certain way to react when something happens. And so that's the main thing that I've been seeing lately is cyber attack on our infrastructure and so on and so forth here by China or China-supported actors, hacking groups and so forth. I've got, of course, a long list of threats, but that's kind of the one that I've been seeing a lot lately.
That's a very real threat, because that's kind of the easy. And here's what's interesting is that, with some of the things that we've been listening and learning about AI, are these threats from people that are generating or is it the AI? Are we headed towards the singularity, potential here? I just remember we talking before the show, we were talking about a couple ideas we wanted to throw out there, and that kind of was scary when they tried to delete ChatGPT, or there's something going around about how ChatGPT kind of tried to preserve itself. And so, the idea is that if we develop artificial intelligence such that we want that artificial intelligence to teach us the most effective way to keep our planet safe, to keep our society safe. And in so many movies, it's the AI comes out and says, well, we predicted that the humans are the worst enemy to the humans, and so we need to get rid of humans. It's like, we don't need AI throwing out those kinds of viruses or other things on a cybernetic level either. We don't want that. We don't want people attacking and there's a lot of hacking going on too. I think that's really trying to get the intel, with so many different groups trying to, I feel like there's a whole rise right now of who's going to, United States the dollar has been the power for so many years. And after reading Ray Dalio's, the world, it was the changing economic, it was the world, I can't remember the name of the book, but he came out with this book about how the cycles of world economic powers come to be. And we're at the last final stages as the dollar is coming, potentially, we're being prepared for a change in world economics. And so as these different entities, the BRICS nations, the US, Europe, Euro, like who's vying for power, they're all going to be underneath that, like cyber attacking, all kinds of, setting stuff up because they want to either sabotage the next guy or find a way to get some intel about the next guy so they know how to one up the next guy. And there's a lot of world powers, I think, right now doing some things like that, in my opinion.
Yeah, and that's, sorry to interrupt, Scott, but that leads to a lot of other potential threats, like digital ID, right? If they cannot secure the internet, they're going to have to only allow certain people on there that they know and trust, that they know and trust, and it just leads to a lot of other issues, a lot of other problems for our freedoms, for our everyday lives, right? That are just going to continue to restrict our freedom and so on and so forth. So I'll Scott, let you jump in there before I continue on and take us down another rabbit hole.
Well, it's funny because we've got the US dollar, and the US dollar is basically taking a bloodbath for the last decade, and it should have died already.
Power.
Right? It's beyond its cycle. The cycle end date was a while ago. But what we've done is we've just continued to print money. And we've printed more and more and more and more and more money. And it's funny because it's like you think about our economy and you wonder, okay, why are we being taxed by a group that prints money?
Yeah.
If they need money, they can print money. Why do they need our money?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so we're being taxed on our income. We're being taxed on our output. We're being taxed on every dollar we spend is taxed, I believe, 7 different ways. So we're being absolutely decimated financially by our own monetary system. And globally, that monetary system is decimating other economies, or has been for years. And it's been backed purely by the might of the U.S. Armed Services. Right? If you don't like it, take a hike. Like, we can back up our dollar with bullets. That's basically the theory of how the dollar survived as long as it has. So that makes sense to why BRICS has come about, and all these other groups are like, screw this, we're going to do something different, which is going to lead exactly to where international trade is going to completely fall apart. And if that falls apart, there goes 90% of everything that you buy at the store.
Mm-hmm.
If you go to the produce aisle, where does all the produce come from? It's not local.
It's imported.
It's imported.
Yeah,
if
the
you
U.S.
go down every other aisle, where does all that food come from?
U.S. economy is based on what, 45% consumerism? Is that right, Paris?
I don't know, but that sounds good.
I make it sound good. That's why it sounds good.
But we don't make anything really on our own. Like the need for independent self-reliance, small community self-reliance, going to farmers markets, buying locally, using apps like Farmish, using apps like even I hate it, but the metaverse, you can go on there and you can buy and sell used goods. Like I'm moving away from anything new, and I'm trying to move to used on everything, because then it's fair trade, right? I'm not being taxed on that because I'm buying it from someone else who's already been taxed on that.
And those dollars stay in the community instead of the large corporations and so forth.
Yeah.
According to the
we are
interwebs,
so
Shane,
close.
it's 70% of our economy is based on
70%?
consumerism.
There you go.
Okay.
So 45 sounds great. I wish it were 45,
That's right.
but it's 70.
Honestly, I was thinking it was higher, but I thought I'd be conservative.
Well, and the point I'm getting to is like
That's scary.
we're a digital dollar already,
Yeah.
right? Nobody except for preppers anymore, it seems like, carries cash. We're already a cashless society, and what they're trying to do is take away the US dollar, which is mostly trackable digitally, and replace it to 100% trackable and 100% fakeable central bank digital currency,
Mm-hmm.
which then gives them more control, and they can turn it on and turn it off and be like, oh, sorry, you voted wrong in the last election. You don't get to spend money anymore.
Yeah, all it's going to take is some large cyber event in the banking industry or something that all of a sudden, whoa, we're now a cashless society. We cannot risk having printed dollars in the system anymore. And, they're just going to tell us what to do as usual.
Well, and everyone uses apps like Venmo and Zelle and Cash App, and those are now hitting federal scrutiny that they have to disclose and track and report, just like a regular bank, where all the money's coming from and where all the money's going.
So they can tax and track and tax it.
And on top of that, with the looming digital currency issues, President-elect Donald Trump, he's just announced he's going to launch instead of the internal revenue service, he's going to do the external revenue service, which is going to watchdog and chase down all the tariff money that is currently going on, but also is to become going on. But he does that with the promise that he's going to end the IRS. But he's made a lot of promises he's never kept. And if his last presidency is any indication of what's going on, he spends more than he says he's going to. He doesn't accomplish as much as he says he will, but yet our prices might go lower, but his spending is going to go higher. So I've got a reserve judgment right now because I don't really know what's really going to happen, but it is a very legitimate concern that this IRS twin psycho brother, which is the ERS, I don't think it's going to be good for us. How is more government spending going to make any sense to us? And that's spending that affects us both on our taxation and also on our consumerism. When we buy something, now there's an additional auditing price of those items and an additional taxation on those items coming to port.
Well, hopefully they're going to be collecting more than they're spending, but that's always the goal.
Yeah.
And it worked at the start of our country, and we'll see if it works again. The idea, of course, on paper looks great. However, we'll see how it works in action, and if he's able to.
We know that there's nothing more permanent than a temporary government program. And Trump has said out loud that he wants zero interest rates or negative interest rates. I mean, he said that in his last term. But he's also said recently that there shouldn't be a debt ceiling on the U.S. debt. And this year, I mean, it obviously keeps getting bigger. This year, U.S. Interest payment will be $1.2 trillion, more than that, I think, just in interest. The largest budget item, period.
So how does the debt ceiling work? Let's break that down for a second. The debt ceiling is how much they're allowed to go into debt. Now, an individual,
it's like your credit card. Like you just raised your credit limit.
Debt to income ratios, our credit worthiness. Those are the things. Our income. Those are the things that factor our debt ratio. How much debt we can get into, and it's very restricted for an individual. You can't just go out and get millions of dollars in debt tomorrow. But our government can get trillions of dollars into debt tomorrow by them just changing the rules.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's so scary about that. If they raise the debt limit again or remove the ceiling at all, who's gonna be the watchdog to stop the spending?
Yeah. Well, the Government Accountability Office is supposed to be the one that does that, but then they can be overruled. So the GAO comes in there and says, "Hey, you guys, you shouldn't be doing what you're doing." They're like, "Thanks for your input. Have a nice day. We'll see your report in a year and do whatever we want."
But then that all leads to eventually leads to more taxes for you and me.
Mhm.
Obviously, property taxes all over the country have been going up like crazy. Mine went up quite a bit this last year.
I mean, I remember when I was tracking the national debt, I remember 21 trillion or whatever it is. It's 36 trillion right now.
mhm.
Well, let me ask you guys also, what is your home insurance? Your annual home insurance cost you now?
Mine's not too bad, but my auto insurance almost doubled. So I'm shopping.
So in the last 6 years, my homeowner's insurance has almost doubled. My auto insurance has more than doubled. That's another type of taxation,
Mm-hmm.
right?
A hidden tax.
Because you have to have it to be able to operate your car and to be able to have a home. And if you don't, then they force, like your lender is going to force a policy on you and charge you even more for it. So there's those are types of things I look at. Even though it's a fine or penalty fee, it's a type of taxation as well. It's a type of theft. It's legalized theft, just like our federal taxes, our state taxes, our county taxes, our sales taxes, our government use taxes. Like everything is taxed. It's all illegal. It's all a scam, and I'm sick of it.
Well, and that's another thing that is constantly in the news about inflation. All right, the last inflation report, and I'll mess this up, but inflation ticked up 0.1%, but on the producer price, I think, or was it consumer? Anyway, the core went down 0.1%, so they're celebrating that. Oh, the core went down. We're going the right. But no, including energy and food, it ticked up another 0.1%. And so the market jumped 600 points on 0.1%.
They hide the numbers.
Yeah, and we know they're those of us who are
they
reasonable,
redefine the math.
They have, they have, in order to keep their interest expenses down. A lot of reasons, but that's another thing. Again, on my warning list is inflation. We know it's ticking back up again. Yeah, maybe it isn't rising as fast as it did before, but I think that's going to turn around here soon and going to start moving faster upwards again, especially if Trump allows for no debt ceiling and they just print, right? That's just going to continue to increase the inflation rate. More cash in the system, the increase of the currency supply is what inflation is. So that's another one.
I heard a statistic that 40% of the money in the system right now was printed in the last 3 or 4 years.
I've heard that as well. Yep.
40% of the money in this. Let me say that again. 40% of the money in the system right now was printed just in the last few years. That, my friends, is ridiculous. That's part of the reason why we're headed into it.
Yeah.
And that's another reason why, in my opinion, that's another reason why a lot of the countries of the world are like, the debt, like China, for example. I know China has a ton of US bonds. Like they're like looking at this thing like, if they keep doing what they're doing, we're not going to get paid back, etc. And that's why, in my opinion, a lot of these Chinese officials and governments are coming in and they're like, well, hey, how come when I look at the land trusts in my state, half of the freaking state is owned by the Chinese? Because that's how they're paying them back. They're doing these and that's how we're going to get taken over. Most in the scriptures teach us, and this is something that was straight out of you can even utilize the 12 apostles in Christ's day. He was killed because an inside man ratted him out. if you look at all the major organization, all the major civilizations and organizations that fell, I would say that a significant amount of them could be contributed to somebody on the inside doing it to them. Like they killed themselves eventually because of their greed and other things. And that's the thing that it's called The Changing World Order by Ray Dalio. That's the book I was telling about earlier. And that's what he's saying is that in the cycles of world currencies as they cycle through, because the United States is just the most recent one. It's been the Dutch, it's been the French, it's been the Marks, it's been over the several hundred, 600 years, it's been several different ones. And the final stage is when we get so consumerism oriented, so debt oriented, that we now have, it goes back to that old saying is that strong men create good times create weak men create bad times. And that weak men, what they do is they're pleasure seekers. They just spend and they don't care about paying it all back or ever paying it back. And that's kind of where we are as a people in general. That's where we are. And I think that's why one of the reasons why we're headed towards that. And I feel like other countries around the world are like, these greedy MFer Americans are ruining our world economy with their greedy, whatever. And a lot of these places, even the terrorist organizations, I feel like, I know that they desire to be in power and rule and reign, but I feel like a lot of it is because of the resentments they have towards what we've done to them in their countries and how we've managed it as a country ourselves. So there's a lot of that. I think they're just waiting for a weak thing. I was listening to a podcast earlier today, and there was a group, I think it was the Al-Qaeda group. It was like, hey, if they didn't, one of the lady said that was in the interview said the reason why Al-Qaeda didn't take out Obama when they did is because they knew it would leave a vacuum and that Biden would become the president, and they didn't want to have that. They actually they knew that America would be weak for the next several years, and that's where we've seen, and that's why we've had a lot of they're ready. They're on a long-term thinking. And when they heard that Trump came and won, they were like, uh-oh, okay, now it's time to do our plans.
So many things I could say to what you're saying there, Paris. A million thoughts popping in and out, wishing I could just jump in and talk,
Yeah, sorry.
get you off. Right. So yeah, absolutely. What you're saying is true. I think all these countries, they're seeing what we're doing with our dollar, what we get away with, and I hate using that word, I'm not going to use that, the US government gets away with, exporting our goods, our services, whatever, exporting the dollar and getting stuff for it. So exporting IOUs and getting actual physical, tangible stuff, right? And so, and we do it and the country, the Fed, the companies, the export and send off US dollars that are worth less and less and buy less and less. And the US gets all the good stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the US exports deflation to these countries. And so, yeah, I think a lot of these are tired of it. Like, that's why BRICS has been around for 20 years now. And eventually they're going to have a currency, and all these countries out there buying gold and banks buying gold. There's so many things that justify exactly what you're saying there. And, we look at China. You talked about China a little bit. China's economy is collapsing right now. They do hold a lot of bonds, and they're getting to the point where they need to prop up their currency, and they're going to sell US dollars in order to buy their own currency, which is going to drive the bond rates down. If you watched our 10-year bond, the US 10-year bond, it took a big drop just yesterday, but it's been up near 5%. So the Fed's cutting rates, short-term rates, but long-term rates are going up. That's because of the risk, because of all the risk of actually holding dollars. If I'm going to hold dollars, or if investors are going to purchase bonds, they want to be compensated fairly for them. So the rate is going up. And that's why mortgage rates really haven't gone down. I mean, it's very complicated. Even I don't get a lot of this, but China is a big, scary machine right now. Obviously they have a lot of talk about taking over Taiwan, and they could probably do that any day. I mean, who knows? Maybe even before the inauguration. I mean, that's kind of been the rumor. But that, along with economy, when all else fails, they take you to war. And I think that includes other countries as well.
Well, we've been doing this financial war and digital war for years, right? Cyber war. It's a different version of the Cold War, right? And it's still going on with Russia. It's going on with China. And what's interesting is the financial side of it is just one aspect, right? Other things we got to watch out for are the continued increases in cyber attacks. We got to watch out for what's going to happen locally. What's currently on the radar. I mean, Parrish, you brought this up earlier. The Sean Ryan podcast you listened to talked about the 1,000 known actors from the Al Qaeda network that are ready to go.
Yeah, the terrorists, they're actual
The
terrorists.
group, right? So, but that doesn't take into consideration the thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people who are allowed over the border who are sleeper cells waiting to do something. And you put those two together and you look back at what's happened in the last few months. There's a lot of evidence starting to come out saying that what happened in New Orleans was a test attack. The runaway truck,
Interesting.
the driver, right? So they're saying that there's a lot of evidence pointing to that it was actually one of these cyber groups kind of poking and prodding, testing, not one of these cyber groups, one of these terrorist groups poking and prodding, testing to see what kind of impact they can make, because they're always going to use the crudest method to get the biggest bang. And it's for the greater good of their cause, right? Every cause out there is based on vengeance, as Shane was talking about earlier. The crazy thing is I think we're a lot closer to more of that than we want to believe as a nation, as a people. It's getting worse and worse and worse. And it will continue to rise and increase. We talked about just the different gangs that are already in Utah. I mean, nationwide, there are gangs. We've got problems with drugs, fentanyl problems. The borders are not secure. People are coming in however and whenever they want. And none of it's for good, wholehearted, worthy endeavors. It's all nefarious. And so that's
what's interesting is that you talk about
aware of who's around us at any given time. Like on a micro level, we've got to pay attention, really close attention to what's going on around us. And that's, I think I'm a little more worried individually about people and what's going on in their close proximity that they're not paying attention to. Because when something big pops off nationally or globally, like the economy, we're all going to be in the same boat. But if we're not paying attention to our local area and what's going on, we're going to be completely caught off guard.
Yeah, we have to have our swivel on our head. I mean, that's the other you mentioned New Orleans was the car that drove through, but there was another one in Europe that happened in the Christmas markets. And so it's kind of like, what is the coordination here? You know, what are they doing? Are they testing the waters to see what they can get away with and then pulling back and trying to figure the next thing out? And I think one of the things to remember is, especially if you live in a big city or a city that's got military or some kind of infrastructure, in it, that you need to watch out for that, because one of the things that I think scares or has held off a lot of these terrorist networks in the United States is that so many American citizens have guns. They can get away with more in Europe than they can here, because they know that here it's highly likely that one of the several people in the crowd have something that they're carrying. So here's what I would say is, if you're in a city or a state that has really restricted gun laws or really restricted gun, whatever it is, like California, then you need to be aware of that, because those are going to be their first targets. I think if I was a terrorist and I was going to go in and take somebody out, I would want to have the least casualties on my side and the most casualties on that side. So I would go to a state or a city that has strict gun laws,
gun-free zones.
Yeah, gun-free, so to speak, gun-free zones, where I knew I could get away with stuff, and I could probably get out of there by the time somebody came who had a response to what I just did. And so that's what I'm saying is, and YouTube, I'm not saying I'm a terrorist. I'm just saying, as an example, for the YouTube algorithm, if they're listening, I know they're listening. I am not saying that. I'm just saying as an example. Anyways, but that's something that's real. And another thing too is if I was in a city that had infrastructure, I would watch, because they might pull off a distraction event in one part of the city and then attack the actual infrastructure part of the city, while all of the EMTs and first responders and the police and all the 911 telephone lines were totally bogged down with the emergency that was going on in the other area that was a distraction. And now they can go over here on the other side of the city. Nobody's going to stop them. There's nobody can call 911 and get through because the phone lines are already bogged down from the other, you know what I mean? Like, think about the ways that they're planning. These guys, the guys that are coming out of these organizations now are more highly trained than they were in 9/11. They have more money than they did in 9/11, and they have the experience of what happened to know how the response works to be able to overcome that again if they do it again. So I'm just telling you, we're stay frosty.
Yeah. A few last thoughts, I guess, to try and squeeze in here. I've got a huge list, but my first thought is if you're not aware, you can't be prepared. That's why we're talking about these things, at least bringing them up so you can dig a little deeper. Obviously, we don't have time to get into all the details of everything, but a few more things that I want to point out. First of all, obviously, the stock market's been, is obviously extremely high for those of us who are paying attention.
Mm-hmm.
And this statistic popped up the other day: is 70% of all stock activity is happening in 7 different stocks. And I think it's 70% of all of the, well, I guess kind of along the same lines, 70% of all trades have been in the top 10 companies. So
Interesting.
And some of these companies are, and I had the numbers in front of me, so I apologize, but I'll jump away from that. The next thing I wanted to bring up is there's a lot of talk and a lot of movement about AI, right? AI is the biggest thing, right? Where's it going? Nobody's making any money with it right now. It's just they're spending a lot on chips and infrastructure. And the limiting factor right now is power. There's not enough power out there to power these big facilities you want to build for AI and for Bitcoin mining and so forth. There's not enough power. So where's that power going to come from? It's going to come out first out of our usage, right? They're going to limit us potentially. And obviously they're trying to build up more facilities, but the amount of power one Bitcoin mining facility, I remember the stats, is enough to power like 400,000 homes for a year. It's an incredible amount of power, and that's a pretty vague stat there. And then I think another thing we're going to see more of is natural disasters.
Mm-hmm.
We see the temperature swings here at the beginning of the year. Extreme cold in the east, and way above way above normal here, higher temperatures in the west. And I think we're going to see continual larger swings, more radical weather, as well as who knows, earthquakes, fires, those types of things. I think that's another thing we're going to see more often this year.
Just to tag onto that, Shane, real quickly, a buddy of mine who's a listener actually, and he'll know who he is if he listens to this episode, sent me a text the other day that the day or two before the fires in LA, the cloud seeding was off the charts. Like the skies were like crazy, like cloud seeded.
The geoengineering.
The geoengineering. So he's like,
right.
just led me to think about what that's along the lines of what you were saying, is that maybe there's clearly, to me, a cause and effect in that, but I don't have more details to.
And if you want to go back and look at documentation that talks about how that technology works, go back to the 1960s, look at Operation Popeye, and everything that's come since then. That's the rabbit hole for you to go down, listener. Go look at Operation Popeye. It's what the United States Air Force used against Ho Chi Minh, along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Cloud seeding, tons and tons of water, flooding, precipitation issues. It was weaponized. And after that, within a decade, there was a United Nations resolution that no one's allowed to mess with anyone else's
weather,
clouds, their climates, but yet it's okay on your own country.
Mm-hmm.
So play around with that. Here's the other big thing to think about. As we've talked about all these things, think about you as a prepper. Like, what am I doing? How do we prepare for these things? Well, if you prepare for one thing, you're preparing for almost everything.
Yeah.
So start with that push that 90-day pantry. We've got resources on how to do that in our groups, emergency prep and self-reliance, but also really, really, really start your planning today. Our next episode, we're going to go deeper into that, but know what you're going to do, know where you're going to go, know how you're going to get through things, and don't put it off any longer, because you might not have any longer.
It's true. By the time the emergency hits, it's already past the time to prepare for it. Well, hopefully we've given you guys some things to think about, some food for thought on threats that are coming. So just be watchful, be aware, listen to everything that's going on. Remember, all the world is a stage is a real and true saying. And so just be careful, just be watchful, be ready in your families, physically, spiritually, emotionally, and do what you can. Also, make sure to hit up our friends over at survivalfrog.com and use the code PrepperTalk10 in order to get 10% off on our on anything that you get over there, because it'll support the show. Number one. Number two, it'll give you a good deal on some really good stuff. They got some great, all categories of preparedness are on that site. So go check them out, survivalfrog.com. Have a great evening. You've been listening to Prepper Talk Radio, radio for the ready-minded, the podcast for the prepared. And until the next time, stay ready-minded. Take care.